All right. So, are you ready to dive into one of the most, I think one of the most fascinating stories in American environmental history?
Oh, definitely.
The battle over Yosemite's Hetch Hetchy Valley.
Yeah.
And get this, it all starts with an earthquake.
Well, the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, I mean,
Yeah.
that really set the stage for the fight over Hetch Hetchy.
Okay, so the question we're going to try to answer today is, could Hetch Hetchy have been saved?
Hmm.
Could this stunning valley right in the heart of Yosemite National Park, could it have escaped being flooded to create a reservoir for San Francisco?
Right.
To understand that we need to go way back in time, even before the earthquake, to look at San Francisco's desperate need for water.
Yeah, think about this. It's the mid-1800s. The gold rush is in full swing, and San Francisco's population is just exploding. Everyone needs water, and all those little streams that had sustained the area,
Mm-hmm.
for centuries, they were just not cutting it.
Okay, so classic supply and demand problem, right?
Exactly.
So what happened? Did they start rationing?
Not exactly. It was more like the Wild West of water. I mean, people were selling it at crazy prices from any source they could find. Tugboats hauling it across the bay, guys with mules selling it by the bucket.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And that's when the Spring Valley Water Company, they entered the scene, they saw an opportunity, and they basically took control of San Francisco's water supply. And by the late 1800s, they had a monopoly.
Hold on. I'm going to need a quick explainer on monopolies. Why are they bad?
Well, when one company has complete control over a vital resource like water, they can basically charge whatever they want. There's no competition to keep them in check.
So San Francisco was at the mercy of this company.
Exactly. And this frustration with the Spring Valley Water Company, this is going to be a major factor in the city's quest for a new independent water source, a quest that leads them to Hetch Hetchy.
Okay, so let's talk about Hetch. Hetchy John Muir, the famous naturalist and founder of the Sierra Club, he described it as a grand landscape garden. Paint us a picture of this valley before the dam.
Well, imagine meadows bursting with wildflowers, buttercups, shooting stars, those vibrant orange monkey flowers, and towering forests, Douglas fir, black oak, ponderosa pine.
Wow.
It was a place of incredible beauty and diversity fed by pure snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada.
It sounds idyllic. I'm picturing something out of a Bob Ross painting.
Well, Muir was especially captivated by Hetch Hetchy's waterfalls. He described them as living, leaping, flowing silver plunging over granite cliffs.
Wow.
But it wasn't just the scenery. Hetch Hetchy was teeming with life. Muir documented 17 different bat species living there.
Wow, 17. That's a lot of bats.
Yeah, it was a haven for wildlife, and of course we can't forget the human history. Hetch Hetchy was home to the Miwok and Pute tribes for centuries. Their connection to the valley was profound.
And this is the place that San Francisco wanted to flood.
It does seem unthinkable, doesn't it?
It does.
But to understand how that happened, we need to delve into the philosophies of two key figures in this story. John Muir, the staunch preservationist, and Gifford Pinchot, the father of American forestry and a leading conservationist.
Okay, I'm already sensing a clash of titans here. Preservation versus conservation. Break it down for us.
Well, think of it this way. Muir believed in protecting nature for its own sake. He saw wild places like Hetch Hetchy as having intrinsic value as spiritual sanctuaries that deserve to be left untouched.
He sounds like a bit of a romantic.
He was a true lover of wilderness. Pinchot, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. He believed in managing natural resources for human benefit.
So more of a use it wisely approach.
Exactly. He saw forests as a resource to be managed and harvested sustainably for timber grazing, and yes, even water storage.
Okay.
And this difference in philosophy, this is going to be at the heart of the Hetch Hetchy debate.
It's fascinating how two people who clearly cared about nature could have such different visions for its future.
Yeah, and their personalities were as different as their philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Muir was this wandering poet-philosopher who once climbed a tree during a windstorm just to experience the full force of nature.
Wait, seriously.
Oh yeah, he was a character, that's for sure. Pinchot, on the other hand, came from a wealthy family, was a friend of presidents, and moved in those elite circles. He was more of a political operator, a master strategist.
So we have this epic clash of personalities and ideologies brewing, and right in the middle of it is Hetch Hetchy. Where do we go from here?
Well, the story takes a turn when San Francisco's ambitious mayor, James Phelan, sets his sights on Hetch Hetchy as the solution to the city's water woes. He sees it as a way to break free from the grip of the Spring Valley Water Company and provide a clean, reliable water supply for generations to come.
This water for a city argument seems reasonable on the surface, but knowing what we know about Hetch Hetchy and Muir's passion for protecting it, It makes you wonder if there was another way. So San Francisco wants Hetch Hetchy, but it's in a national park.
Right.
So, I mean, didn't they run into some roadblocks?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Their first attempt to get permission to dam the valley was rejected by the Secretary of the Interior, Ethan Hitchcock,
Okay.
who was a staunch Muir supporter. This was back in 1901, but then a few years later, everything changed.
Wait, if Hitchcock opposed the dam, how'd it get built?
Hmm.
Did the earthquake really change that much?
You're right to question that. It wasn't just the earthquake itself, but how it was USE by the pro-dam folks.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, images of those raging fires and dry hydrants were everywhere.
Right.
The public was terrified, and the message was clear. If San Francisco had had that Hetchy Reservoir,
Right.
things would have been different.
Yeah, it played right into that water for the city narrative.
Yeah.
But you're saying that wasn't the whole story?
The real issue wasn't a lack of water sources, but a fragile distribution system that crumbled during the quake. There were other options besides flooding Hetch Hetchy, but they weren't as politically expedient.
So even with the earthquake kind of pushing things along, they still had Hitchcock to contend with. He wasn't going to back down easily, was he?
No, Hitchcock was a tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
But here's where Pinchot's political savvy comes into play.
No.
Remember, he is close friends with President Roosevelt.
Right.
And he knew that Roosevelt was starting to get frustrated with Hitchcock's conservation policies.
I'm sensing some behind-the-scenes maneuvering here.
Pinchot saw an opportunity to advance the Hetch Hetchy project. He orchestrated this meeting between Roosevelt and his new Secretary of the Interior, James Rudolph Garfield.
Okay.
And Marson Manson, San Francisco's city engineer who was just tirelessly championing the dam, Pinchot, knew that Roosevelt, a pragmatist at heart, would be receptive to the idea of a dam that could benefit a major city.
I see your point about Pinchot being pragmatic, but wasn't it kind of cold, D, to go against Muir like that? I mean, they were friends.
It's definitely a complicated situation. Pinchot genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, striking that balance between conservation and human needs.
Yeah.
But for Muir, it felt like a betrayal. He saw Hetch Hetchy as a sacred place, a temple of nature, and he couldn't fathom sacrificing it for any reason.
It's almost like Hetch Hetchy became this symbolic battleground for their different worldviews. So
Yeah.
with Pinchot pulling strings in the background, what happened next? Did San Francisco get the approval they so desperately wanted?
Well, not right away. There were still a lot of legal hurdles to clear and a growing public outcry against the dam. But the pro-dam forces, they had momentum on their side, and they were relentless in their pursuit. This led to one of those heated environmental debates in American history, the fight over the Raker Act.
Okay, the Raker Act, so this was the legal, okay, for the dam right. Sounds like a pretty big deal.
The Raker Act was basically the legislative showdown over Hetch Hetchy. Imagine Congress arguing about drilling in Yellowstone today. That level of heated newspapers across the country were filled with opinions and editorials, some calling it a necessary step for progress, others labeling it an act of vandalism against nature.
It must have been fascinating to watch this play out in the media. It really captures that tension between those who see nature as a resource to be used and those who believe in protecting it for its own sake.
Absolutely. And it's a debate that's still relevant today, right? We grapple with similar issues when we talk about things like renewable energy mining and land use.
So what happened with the Raker Act? Did it pass?
Yes, it did. In December 1913, after years of intense debate and lobbying, the Raker Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. This gave San Francisco the legal authority to dam Hetch Hetchy and create that reservoir for the city.
It must have been a crushing defeat for Muir and the preservationists. All that effort, all that passion, and they lost.
It was a devastating blow for Muir. He poured his heart and soul into trying to save Hetch Hetchy. He wrote countless letters, gave speeches, even met with President Roosevelt to plead his case. But in the end, it wasn't enough.
So did they start building the dam right away?
There was a brief pause after the Raker Act was passed, partly out of respect for Muir, who was by then in failing health. He died in 1914, just a year after the act was signed. Some saw his death as a symbolic end to an era, the passing of a generation that had witnessed the destruction of one of America's most iconic landscapes.
Okay, so Muir passes away, the dam gets built, San Francisco gets its water. Is that basically the end of the story?
Well, in a practical sense, yes. The O'Shaughnessy Dam, named after the chief engineer of the project, was completed in 1923, and Hetch Hetchy Valley was slowly submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. But the story of Hetch Hetchy, it didn't end there. In fact, it took on a new life in the decades that followed.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because Hetch Hetchy became this symbol, this rallying cry for the environmental movement.
Precisely. It's almost like Hetch Hetchy became a warning for the future of parks.
So Hetch Hetchy becomes this cautionary tale.
Right.
How did that shift the environmental movement?
Well, it forced a real reckoning. The Sierra Club, which Muir founded, had actually supported the Raker Act initially. They thought some compromises were necessary, for the greater good. But after seeing Hetch Hetchy flooded, they totally reversed their stance.
That's a huge change. So they went from let's work with development to parks are off limits.
Pretty much. It's like they realized, wait, if a national park can be dammed, what's stopping them from logging in Yellowstone or mining the Grand Canyon? Hetch Hetchy really drew a line in the sand.
Yeah. And how did Pinchot react to all this? Was he having second thoughts about his role in the dam?
Well, the sources don't mention any regrets from Pinchot, at least not publicly. He maintained that the dam was a necessary trade-off, that San Francisco's need for water outweighed the loss of one valley. But you can imagine it probably put a strain on his friendship with Muir supporters.
This whole story is just so human, big personalities, conflicting ideals. It wasn't just about water or rocks, it was about how we value nature.
That's what makes it so enduring.
Ooh.
And it's not just history, right? There's actually a movement today to restore Hetch Hetchy, to tear down the dam and let the valley return to its natural state.
Wait, really? After all this time? That seems ambitious, to say the least. What are the chances of that actually happening?
It's a long shot, for sure. The dam provides water for millions of people, and there's a lot of political and economic resistance to removing it. But the fact that people are even talking about it shows how powerful the Hetch Hetchy story is. It still resonates even a century later.
It makes you wonder what Muir would think if he could see the state of the environmental movement today. Would he be proud of how far we've come or heartbroken by how much we've lost?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think he'd be both thrilled to see how much awareness there is about conservation, the global movements to fight climate change, but also devastated by the scale of deforestation, pollution, the loss of biodiversity. It's a bittersweet picture.
But you know what? Even with all the challenges we face, there's something hopeful about the fact that this one valley, this one story, it continues to inspire people to fight for nature. It's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, it's worth pushing for change.
And that even small actions can make a difference. Muir started as one voice in the wilderness, literally, and his words sparked a movement that's still shaping how we think about our relationship with nature. So what stands out to you about the Hetch Hetchy story? What lessons can we learn from this battle, and how can we apply them to the environmental challenges we face today?
That's something for you to consider as we wrap up this deep dive into the turbulent history of Yosemite's Hetch Hetchy Valley.